This is not legal advice and I'm not a lawyer. So yeah. What is good, producer family? I am back for a video about uploading your beats to streaming services and the one thing you need to not do when using a distribution service to get your music onto a streaming platform. So let's get into the video. In general, it's not really a bad idea to use music streaming services. Spotify has 232 million active listeners. Apple Music has 50 million monthly paid subscribers, right? This was October 22nd, 2019. And then Pandora has 66 million active listeners. I don't know why you'd choose Pandora, but there you go. Once more, you could even create revenue off of your beat streams. Now, you need to understand that you need to be careful, because if your music, your beats have uncleared audio samples in them, you can face legal action, right? You can be sued for that. Doesn't matter how big, how small you are always subject to facing legal actions for uncleared audio samples. So just keep that in mind as well. So that's a big issue producers face, because guess what? Sometimes, if you're like me, you do hip hop soul beats where you use actual samples that I do not have cleared. It can be sued at any point in time for that. It's always a possibility. My big reason for not uploading is because unlike YouTube or SoundCloud, there's no description to where they can go purchase the beat, right? If I upload to Spotify or Apple Music, so I need to rely on the listener being an artist, which is my next point. Then they have to see my name and then go to YouTube or Instagram and search my name, right? So that's a big hoop to jump through, because say my name on Spotify is Sound Design, but then say my Instagram name is produced by Sound Design. They might not find me on Instagram. They might not find me on YouTube. It's a possibility. Boom, you lose out on a sale right there. All right. The next thing, they don't know so then you're like, oh, then they just look up my BeatStars account. Duh. How do they know you're on BeatStars? How do they know you're on Airbit? How do they know about these beat selling platforms? Once more, another hoop to go through. And then once they go on your Instagram, they have to find your beat store through your Instagram. So if you don't have your bio linked up correctly, boom, you messed up there again. I mean, I guess they can send you a message or whatnot, but once more, still not convenient enough for me. So that's a big reason for me, is it's just too many hoops to jump through to go from Spotify onto Instagram, onto my beat selling platform. It's just too much. And then also the passive listeners that make up Spotify and Apple Music and all those other streaming services, right? The number of listeners right there, they might just be somebody who listens to music and doesn't have any intention on actually creating music. How many people do you know search on YouTube, type beat, or even, know what BeatStars or Airbit is, and actually browse Airbit and BeatStars that aren't actually artists, right? Everybody who's searching up type beat or is searching BeatStars and Airbit for beats, they want to use those beats to create music. That's not just to passively listen and be like, wow, this guy's beat, crazy. And then like what? People have intentions of actually creating songs. So in my personal opinion, right now, I don't think it's worth it. You can though, if you want. But let's talk about the biggest issue that you might face when uploading to streaming service platforms and what you should really do to just avoid this. So the biggest issue here is Content ID. And also, this is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer. So Content ID is something made with YouTube. Now, to my understanding, when you use something like DistroKid, I believe it's called YouTube Money, you have to actually sign up for it. And you have to actually physically go through a process of getting your track enabled for it. Just because you use DistroKid doesn't mean that Content ID is automatically applied. I believe you have to go out of your way and sign up to enable Content ID on your track. Okay, so Content ID is extremely misused by producers and by artists. Okay, so it's on both sides here. Producers basically end up contradicting their own contracts, and artists end up breaking their own contracts. So what Content ID is it's a digital fingerprinting system developed by Google, in which is used to easily identify and manage copyright content on YouTube. So only YouTube to my knowledge. Okay, so that's to my knowledge. So let's say that you take your beat and you upload it to Spotify, Apple Music, and Tidal through a DistroKid. I don't know about other distribution services, but to my knowledge, with DistroKid, once more, you have to physically sign up and enable YouTube Money for Content ID. So what you could do is just not sign up for Content ID, but still have your music on the streaming services themselves. It just won't be enabled for Content ID on YouTube. So you could upload your beat to Spotify and Apple Music if you wanted to, and then an artist could come along and do the same thing, and it'd basically be fine. They wouldn't be hit with the copyrights. But what happens here is this is how producers usually think about this. is we make a beat, we upload it to YouTube or BeatStars or any other beat store and try to lease it. Of course, that's just simple, right? So now if you go through a distributor and upload it to a streaming service, you can claim Content ID on it. Now, a lot of producers think that they should claim Content ID on their own beat because what they think of is if I copyright this, that means if somebody takes my beat from YouTube and like MP3s it and MP3 downloads it off of YouTube, that means that I can see that and I can copyright claim them and make sure that they don't make any money off of that. But let's say that you claim Content ID on it and then somebody actually goes out and buys a lease. And then you say in your lease, you can have 10,000 monetized video streams, 20,000 monetized video streams in your lease, right? These are all things that say in your lease, and all these things are always dependent on your own contracts. So keep that in mind as well. This is just kind of some general tips and knowledge about this kind of stuff, to my understanding. Right, so now let's say an artist buys an MP3 lease from you, and in your MP3 lease you say, hey, you can have 10,000 monetized video streams. Okay, but now since you Content ID'd it, what's gonna happen is when that artist goes to upload their music video, YouTube is gonna say, hey, you're getting a copyright claim because this actually belongs to Sound Design, the guy who Content ID'd it. Okay, and they're gonna be like, well, I actually purchased a lease from Sound Design that says I can use this for monetized video streams. So in my opinion, it would make sense that you could go through Google and tell Google and say, hey, artist A, he bought a lease from me and he has the rights to get 10,000 monetized video streams on that. So once more, I don't believe you can tell Google that says, hey, up to 10,000 video plays, this guy's good, but once it hits 10,001, hit him with that copyright claim again because he doesn't have a lease for that. I don't think that's a possibility. I think you'd have to manually do that yourself. But once more, I don't know if that's an option in the first place. So I'm here to chime in quickly and just say that I don't know if Google Ads has a policy for Content ID on leasing, on audio that you're leasing, right? I don't know if they have a policy that says, hey, if you plan on leasing or selling this audio, do not Content ID it. Okay, I don't know if that's a thing. I'll look into that more. Just a quick thought when editing the video. So that's more blurred lines of an area. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to explain this. It's just, I haven't been through the process myself, so I can't tell you. General idea, the knowledge makes sense, right? You Content ID your beat so that way if somebody just downloads it off YouTube and then makes their own song to it, you can be like, hey, you don't own that. I'm gonna take all the money you make from that because you didn't buy a lease. But then it's like, if somebody did buy a lease, can you tell Google that, hey, that person's fine, they bought a lease, they get 10,000 video streams? So the quick and easy solution to all of this is, in general, just don't Content ID your stuff as a producer. That's, if you guys can learn anything from this, you can upload to streaming services, but just do not enable Content ID on this. And like I said, to my knowledge, with using DistroKid, it is something you physically have to sign up for and enable for a beat or for your song, right? It's not something that is automatically applied to my knowledge. Please do research on that on your own, but to my knowledge, you have to physically go out of your way and enable Content ID. So just because you upload something through DistroKid and through Spotify or on a Spotify doesn't mean that it's Content ID'd on YouTube automatically. This actually comes from Hypebot. This is a good article on this. I have a video I'm gonna link in the description below. There's a few links you guys can check out to learn more. Here are the things that do not qualify for Content ID. Unlicensed music and video, which is basically if somebody just YouTube the MP3s your beat, or music or video that was licensed but without exclusivity. As a producer, this applies to as well if you're using an uncleared sample that you do not own the exclusive rights to or that you didn't make yourself. You cannot claim Content ID on that. That is also you going against the terms of, you know, the Content ID terms itself. In general, just avoid using Content ID and understand that if you use uncleared samples on distribution services, on YouTube, on BeatStars, on any service really, that you are, you know, you can be faced with legal actions and with lawsuits. So understand that as well. That's just kind of, I think everybody knows that if you use an uncleared sample, no matter how big, how small you are, you can be faced with a lawsuit because of your use with that uncleared. Okay, so that falls into a free download from your beat store because you still get a license, you're still agreeing to the terms and contracts of a license there, or any lease that's not an exclusive lease. So an MP3 lease, a wave lease, a premium wave lease, you know, unlimited wave lease, unlimited stem lease, right? Every lease from free up to not exclusive is of course not exclusive. Buys the exclusive rights for your beat. They now own that, so they can Content ID that. This is not legal advice and I'm not a lawyer. So this is more for artists, and there's actually a part in the BeatStars contract that says this, in the default BeatStars contract that says this. And then also, what you guys need to understand is going back to this side of do not using content ID. Let's say you get a sample from a sample kit that's royalty free, or you get a sample from Looperman that's royalty free, right? All samples on Looperman are royalty free, unless of course somebody goes ahead. You know, in the rare case, somebody could upload a non-royalty free sample that they don't own the rights to onto Looperman, and then you would never know because you would think they made it. That's a whole different story though, whole different thing. It's kind of a rare story, but it is possible, right? So let's say that you download a loop from Looperman, right? And then you go ahead, you make a beat, you upload it to YouTube, and then you go ahead and you upload it to a streaming service with a distributor, and you use Content ID because you're like, hey, you know, if anybody steals my beat, I want to make sure that I can see that and copyright claim them. Well, guess what? You used a loop that was available to hundreds of thousands of other people royalty free on a website that you don't own the rights to. Okay, you do not own the rights to that loop, to my knowledge, with Looperman. So now what's going to happen is your producer A, who first uploaded it and claimed Content ID, now I'm going to come along, I'm going to download the same loop, and I'm going to upload it to YouTube. And guess what? I'm going to get hit with a copyright claim from you because you Content ID'd it. That doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. You know, it could be vice versa, right? I could Content ID it, and then you could come along and upload a beat to it, and then you're getting hit with a copyright claim. Okay? And now what more happens? All right, now say an artist comes along and buys the lease. Now they're getting hit with a copyright claim. It's just the biggest takeaway from all this is just don't Content ID your stuff. It's a big mess. Truthfully, I don't understand how all of this stuff works in general, 100%. Just do not Content ID your stuff. And I'm not a lawyer. If you used uncleared audio samples, you're always faced to legal action as well. That's something that can always happen. Once more, this isn't legal advice. This is just my understanding and why I don't do things and what I think is the best route for artists to go in my own opinion. This is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. Also, there's another great video on Hypebot of them breaking it down. Basically, this is more directed towards artists, but artists, if they use free beats, they can't enable Content ID. If they lease a beat, they can't enable Content ID. Only exclusive beats can have Content ID. So now what's important to know is some of you guys might be thinking, well, how does somebody get monetized YouTube video streams if they don't have Content ID on the beat? Content ID is different than monetizing on YouTube. Those are two different things. You can monetize the beat on YouTube if you have the contract for it, because you're giving them the contract. You're giving the contract to the artist that says, hey, you can use that, right? Once more, it's a little bit of a blurred line there, going back to the original situation. You know, if I have Content ID enabled on it, can they, how does that work with them getting a copyright claim? Can I, tell Google not to give them the copyright claim? But basically, just because you lease a beat doesn't mean you can have Content ID enabled on it. So that's more for artists to recognize, and that's something for you to tell artists. And I highly recommend that whenever somebody buys a beat or downloads a beat from your beat store, in the email, you should probably tell them, hey, do not enable Content ID if this goes on any streaming platform or use a distributor like that. What the contract is basically telling you right now is, let's say artist A goes out and buys an MP3 lease. He then uses a distribution service to get the Content ID function enabled, and he claims it basically for himself and says that, hey, I own this. So then artist B comes along, buys the MP3 lease for the same beat, goes to upload the music video on YouTube or whatnot, and then he receives a copyright claim from artist A because artist A claims that it's his original content. So now, even though artist B has bought the license that enables him monetize video streams, he cannot have monetized video streams because he's receiving a Content ID copyright claim from artist A. It's a huge headache, right? So the best way to go about all this stuff is, one, as a producer, don't use Content ID. And then when an artist buys your beat or free downloads your beat, you should probably message them and say, hey, make sure you do not enable Content ID. I'm trying to explain this to the best of my ability and the best of my knowledge. There's links in the description below that can help you understand more of this. And at the end of the day, if you're a producer, just don't use Content ID. Okay, it's simple. You have to go out of your way to sign up for Content ID, so just don't sign up for that. It's called YouTube Money and DistroKid, I believe, so just don't enable that. So yes, you can upload to streaming services and whatnot. In my opinion, in general, I just don't think it's worth it. Just don't Content ID your beats in the first place. It's just gonna save you a big headache. So I'll see you guys in the next one.